Marcus Williams stood on the wooden porch of his farmhouse as the sun painted the Texas sky orange and pink. The morning air was cool against his dark skin, and he breathed deeply. This was his favorite time of day, when the world was quiet and peaceful. His farm stretched out before him like a green carpet dotted with black and white cattle. 200 acres of land that belonged to him and no one else. The rooster crowed from the chicken coop, and Marcus smiled. 5 years ago, he never thought he would find peace like this. Back then, he was a different man with a different name. The other soldiers called him Silent Ghost because he could move through enemy territory without making a sound. He could eliminate targets and disappear before anyone knew he was there. But those days were over now. Marcus Williams was just a farmer. He walked down the porch steps and headed toward the barn. His boots crunched on the gravel path as he made his morning rounds. The cattle looked healthy and strong in the pasture. His vegetable garden was growing well, with tomatoes and corn reaching toward the sky. Everything was exactly as it should be on a working farm in rural Texas. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and Marcus liked it that way. He had neighbors, but they were spread out across the rolling hills. Most of them were good people who minded their own business. They knew Marcus was a veteran, but he never talked about his military service. When people asked questions, he would just say he served his country and change the subject. Marcus had bought this farm with his military savings after 20 years of service. The land was cheap because it was so far from everything. The previous owner was an old man who could no longer work the property. Marcus fixed up the farmhouse and built new fences. He learned how to raise cattle and grow crops. It was hard work, but it was honest work that helped him sleep at night. The farm sat 20 miles from the Mexican border in a valley surrounded by natural barriers. A river ran along the eastern edge, providing fresh water for his animals. Dense woods covered the northern boundary where deer and wild turkeys lived. Rocky hills rose up to the south, creating a wall of stone and cactus. To most people, it looked like beautiful countryside. To Marcus, it looked like a defensible position. He could not completely turn off his military training, even though he tried. When he walked his property, he automatically noted sight lines and cover positions. He knew where someone could hide and where they would have to cross open ground. These thoughts came to him without effort, like breathing or blinking. They were part of who he was, even though he wanted to leave that life behind. The local people knew Marcus as a quiet man who worked hard and kept to himself. He was polite when he went to town for supplies, but he did not socialize much. Some folks thought he was unfriendly, but the truth was simpler. Marcus had seen too much violence in his military career. He had done things that were necessary but not pleasant. Now he just wanted to live in peace and quiet. His days followed a simple routine. Wake up before dawn and check on the animals. Fix anything that was broken. Tend to his garden and maintain his equipment. In the evenings, he would sit on his porch and watch the sunset. Sometimes he read books or listened to music. It was a simple life, but it was his life. Marcus had no wife or children. The military had taken up most of his adult years, and relationships were difficult when you disappeared for months at a time on classified missions. Now, at 42 years old, he was content to live alone with his cattle and his thoughts. The farm gave him purpose, and the solitude gave him peace. As he finished his morning chores, the sun climbed higher in the sky. Another day was beginning on the Williams farm. Marcus had no idea that his quiet life was about to change forever. Dark forces were already watching his property and making plans. The silent ghost would soon be needed again. Marcus knew something was wrong the moment he stepped out of his farmhouse on Tuesday morning. The air felt different, somehow like the calm before a storm. His cattle were bunched together in the far corner of the pasture instead of spread out grazing. Animals always sensed danger before humans did. He walked toward the fence line where his prize bull usually stood guard over the herd. The big black animal was nowhere to be seen. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he approached the fence. 3 sections of wire had been cut clean through with professional tools. The cuts were too precise to be accidental damage from animals or weather. Fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the mud told the story. Heavy trucks had been here during the night. Marcus knelt down and studied the marks carefully. 3 vehicles, at least maybe 4. They had backed up to his fence and loaded his cattle like they owned them. His bull and 6 of his best cows were gone. Marcus stood up and scanned the horizon with eyes that had been trained to spot enemies across desert landscapes. Nothing moved except the wind through the grass. Whoever had done this was long gone, but they had left a message. They could take what they wanted whenever they wanted it. The veteran in him recognized this as a probing attack. Someone was testing his defenses and measuring his response. In the military, they called it reconnaissance by fire. You hit the enemy with a small attack to see how they would react. Then you planned your real assault based on what you learned. Marcus walked back to his farmhouse and called the sheriff department. Deputy Rodriguez arrived 2 hours later in a dusty patrol car. He was a young man who looked tired before his day even started. Marcus showed him the cut fence and the tire tracks, but the deputy just shook his head. "You are the 5th farmer to call this week," Rodriguez said as he wrote notes on a clipboard. "Same thing every time. Professional jod-clean cuts and no witnesses. We think it might be connected to the drug trade coming up from Mexico. These people have money and equipment, and they are not afraid to use force." Marcus asked what the sheriff department planned to do about it. Rodriguez shrugged and said they were short on manpower and had no leads to follow. He advised Marcus to install better security and maybe consider selling this farm if the harassment continued. Then he drove away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Over the next few weeks, Marcus heard similar stories from other farmers in the area. The Johnson family lost 20 head of cattle in one night. The Martinez farm had their corn crop destroyed by men with machetes. Old Mrs. Patterson found dead chickens scattered around her yard with their necks broken. Fear was spreading through the farming community like wildfire. Marcus started noticing other signs that made his military instincts kick into high gear. Strange vehicles drove slowly past his property at odd hours. Always trucks with tinted windows and license plates he could not quite read. They never stopped, but they slowed down long enough to look at his house and barn. His security cameras caught shadows moving at the edge of his property after midnight. The figures were too far away to identify, but they moved with purpose, not like animals or lost hikers. Someone was studying his farm, mapping out his routines and looking for weaknesses. Marcus found cigarette butts near his fence line where someone had been watching his house. The brands were Mexican and still fresh. Boot prints in the soft earth showed at least 3 different men had been there recently. They were conducting surveillance like professionals preparing for an operation. The local farmers were scared, and the police were overwhelmed. Marcus realized he was facing an enemy that operated like a military unit. They had resources, training, and no respect for the law. These were not common thieves looking for quick money. This was something much more dangerous, and it was headed his way. The knock on Marcus's door came at 9:30 on a rainy Thursday evening. He was not expecting visitors, and few people knew where he lived. Through the window he saw a small woman with gray hair standing on his porch. She looked nervous and kept glancing over her shoulder like someone might be following her. Marcus opened the door and recognized Elena Rodriguez, the deputy's mother. She had lived in the area her whole life, and her family had been farming here for 3 generations. Her weathered hands shook as she clutched a worn leather purse against her chest. Rain dripped from her hair, and her eyes showed the kind of fear that comes from knowing real danger. "Please, can I come in?" she said in accented English. "I need to tell you something important about what is happening to the farms. It is not safe to talk outside where they might see us." Marcus stepped aside and led her into his living room. Elena sat on the edge of his couch like she was ready to run at any moment. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture and the few military photos on the walls. Her eyes lingered on a picture of Marcus in his dress uniform with medals on his chest. "You were a soldier," she said. "A good soldier, I think. That is why I came to warn you about what is coming." Elena told him what she had learned from her cousin, who worked as a translator for the Border Patrol. A powerful drug cartel from Mexico had decided to expand their operations into their region. They were not asking permission or offering to pay rent. The cartel simply took what they wanted and killed anyone who tried to stop them. They need places to store drugs and hide their people, Elena explained. Farms are perfect because they are private and away from the main roads. The police cannot watch every farm all the time. So the cartel picks the ones they want and forces the owners to cooperate. Several farmers had already been forced to abandon their land after receiving death threats. Those who stayed were essentially working for the cartel now, whether they wanted to or not. The criminals used their barns to store drugs and their fields to land small airplanes at night. Anyone who refused to cooperate simply disappeared. Elena leaned forward and lowered her voice. Your farm is special to them, she said. It sits right on their smuggling route and has good natural barriers. They can use your river to move boats and your hills to hide lookouts. They have already decided to take your property, and they are planning to come for you soon. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a copy of their map, she said. My cousin found it in some papers the Border Patrol seized. Your farm is marked with a red circle and a date. They plan to visit you this weekend. Marcus studied the map and felt his military training kick in automatically. The cartel had done their homework well. They had identified all the key terrain features and marked the best approach routes. Someone with tactical knowledge had planned this operation like a military assault. Elena begged him to leave before they came. She told him stories about other farmers who had tried to fight back. Bodies found in shallow graves. Families that disappeared in the middle of the night. The cartel did not take prisoners or show mercy to people who resisted them. But Marcus was not like the other farmers. As Elena spoke, he was already analyzing the tactical situation in his mind. 20 years of military training had taught him that running from enemies only encouraged them to chase you harder. Sometimes the only way to stop a threat was to face it head-on with superior firepower and tactics. After Elena left, Marcus sat in his kitchen and studied the cartel map. They had made a serious mistake in choosing his farm as their target. The silent ghost had been sleeping for 5 years, but he was about to wake up. And when he did, these criminals would learn what happened when you threatened a Delta Force operator on his own ground. Marcus did not sleep that night. Instead, he spent the dark hours walking his property and seeing it through the eyes of a soldier instead of a farmer. Every hill and tree became a potential fighting position. Every open space became a field of fire. The peaceful farm that had been his sanctuary was about to become a battlefield. By dawn, he had identified 3 primary defensive positions that would give him the best advantage against multiple attackers. The barn sat on high ground with clear sight lines in all directions. The rocky outcrop near the southern fence provided natural cover and multiple escape routes. The dense woods along the northern border offered concealment for flanking maneuvers. Marcus began his preparations immediately. He drove to town and bought supplies that would look normal to anyone watching. Fence posts and barbed wire for farm repairs, fertilizer and diesel fuel for his crops, pipes and fittings for irrigation work. To casual observers, he was just a farmer doing routine maintenance. But Marcus knew these innocent materials could be turned into effective weapons. Working mostly at night when prying eyes could not see him, Marcus began transforming his farm into a fortress. He dug fighting positions at key locations and camouflaged them with natural materials. Each position was stocked with supplies for extended combat, water and food, first aid kits and ammunition, communication equipment, and night vision gear. The barn became his primary command post. Marcus reinforced the walls with steel plates hidden behind false wood panels. He cut firing ports that looked like normal windows but provided perfect fields of fire. The hayloft became an observation post with a clear view of all approach routes. Anyone trying to reach the farmhouse would have to cross open ground under his guns. His weapons cache came out of storage for the first time in 5 years. Marcus had always been careful to follow all laws regarding firearm ownership, but his collection included tools that most civilians would never need. Military-grade rifles with night scopes, body armor designed to stop high-powered rounds, explosives that were legal for farming but deadly in the right hands. Marcus set up tripwires connected to early warning devices along the most likely approach routes. Motion sensors hidden in trees would alert him to movement long before enemies reached his prepared positions. Remote cameras provided real-time intelligence about anyone approaching his property. The farm that had once been open and welcoming became a maze of hidden traps and observation points. The most important preparation was mental. Marcus spent hours visualizing different attack scenarios and rehearsing his responses until they became automatic. He studied everything he could learn about cartel tactics and operations. These criminals were not random thugs but organized soldiers who used military equipment and training. Fighting them would require all of his special operations skills. He established multiple supply caches across the property so he could continue fighting even if his primary positions were overrun. Each cache contained enough ammunition and supplies to sustain combat operations for several days. Underground bunkers provided secure fallback positions if he needed to disappear and strike from unexpected angles. Marcus also prepared for the possibility that he might not survive the coming battle. He wrote letters to be mailed if he died explaining what had happened and why. He left detailed evidence about the cartel operations for law enforcement to find. If the silent ghost fell protecting his farm, at least the truth would come out. By Friday evening, everything was ready. Marcus had transformed 200 acres of peaceful farmland into a tactical nightmare for anyone foolish enough to attack it. His years of military experience had taught him that the side with better preparation usually won regardless of numbers. The cartel soldiers were about to learn that lesson the hard way. As darkness fell, Marcus took his position in the barn and waited. His night vision equipment showed him every shadow and movement across his property. Communication devices kept him connected to his early warning network. The silent ghost was awake and ready for war. Let them come. The motion sensors triggered at exactly 2:30 in the morning. Marcus was already awake in his observation post, watching the darkness through night vision goggles. 3 vehicles had turned off the main road without headlights and were approaching his property from different directions. The cartel was using classic military tactics to surround and overwhelm their target. Marcus counted 12 armed men as they deployed from the trucks. They moved with practiced coordination, suggesting these were not street criminals but trained soldiers. Their equipment was professional grade with body armor and automatic weapons. They expected to find a sleeping farmer who would surrender when faced with superior numbers. The first team of 4 men approached the farmhouse, planning to breach the front door and secure the building. They had no idea that Marcus was not inside, but rather watching them from his concealed position in the barn. As they moved across the open yard, they were completely exposed with no cover between them and his rifles. Marcus activated his first surprise. Motion-triggered floodlights suddenly blazed to life around the farmhouse, turning night into day. The attacking soldiers were caught in the open, temporarily blinded by the sudden brightness. Their night vision was ruined, and they scrambled for cover that did not exist. The silent ghost engaged his first target with a precision shot that dropped the team leader instantly. The other 3 men dove for cover behind a water trough, but it provided no protection from Marcus's elevated position. His military training took over and muscle memory guided his actions. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Another cartel soldier fell. The remaining 2 members of the assault team tried to retreat to their vehicle, but Marcus was already tracking their movement. Years of combat experience had taught him to anticipate enemy actions and position himself accordingly. 2 more shots echoed across the farm, and suddenly the primary assault team was eliminated. Chaos erupted as the other cartel soldiers realized they were under attack from a skilled opponent. Radio chatter filled the airwaves as they tried to coordinate a response. Marcus listened to their panicked Spanish conversations through equipment that automatically translated their words. Fear was already creeping into their voices. The second team, approaching from the eastern side near the river, walked directly into Marcus's prepared kill zone. Tripwires triggered explosive devices made from farming materials that he had positioned along their route. The night sky lit up with orange flames as 3 more attackers were eliminated. The survivors scattered in panic, abandoning their coordinated assault plan. Marcus was already moving to his next position before the enemy could fix his location. Speed and mobility were his greatest advantages against superior numbers. His years of training in unconventional warfare had taught him that one skilled operator could defeat a larger force by staying unpredictable and maintaining the initiative. The third team advancing through the rocky hills to the south found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple directions. Marcus had prepared overlapping fields of fire that made it impossible for them to advance or retreat safely. Every position had been chosen to maximize his tactical advantage while minimizing their options. Within 15 minutes of the first shot, the Cartels' carefully planned assault had been completely disrupted. Their 12-man strike force was reduced to 3 confused and frightened survivors scattered across the property. The silent ghost had turned their coordinated attack into a nightmare of death and destruction. Marcus used his communication equipment to monitor their desperate radio calls for backup and extraction. But help was hours away, and they were already beaten. The veteran knew that maintaining pressure on a broken enemy was crucial to preventing them from regrouping and launching a counterattack. The Cartel soldiers had expected to face an unarmed civilian, not a special operations veteran defending his own territory. They were trained to intimidate and overwhelm helpless victims, not engage in combat with someone who possessed superior skills and knowledge of the battlefield. Their confidence had been shattered along with their tactical plan. As dawn approached, Marcus prepared to hunt down the remaining survivors. The defensive phase of the battle was over. Now it was time for the silent ghost to become the hunter and finish what these criminals had started. They had brought war to his peaceful farm, and now they would face the consequences of that decision. The 3 surviving Cartel soldiers quickly realized they were no longer the hunters but the hunted. Their confident assault had turned into a desperate fight for survival against an enemy who seemed to be everywhere at once. Radio communications became frantic as they tried to understand how their mission had gone so wrong so quickly. Marcus moved through the pre-dawn darkness like the ghost he was nicknamed for. Every step was calculated and silent. His black clothing blended with the shadows, and his knowledge of the terrain gave him overwhelming advantage. The Cartel soldiers were trapped on unfamiliar ground against an opponent who knew every rock and tree. The first survivor tried to reach the vehicles parked along the main road. Marcus had anticipated this move and was waiting in position when the desperate man broke cover. The Cartel soldier ran across open ground believing speed would save him. A single precise shot from Marcus's rifle ended that hope permanently. The second survivor attempted to hide in the dense woods along the northern boundary, but Marcus had spent years learning to track enemies through hostile terrain. Broken branches and disturbed leaves told the story of the man's passage. Fear made people clumsy, and desperate criminals were no exception to that rule. Marcus stalked his prey through the trees, moving from shadow to shadow without making a sound. The Cartel soldier was breathing heavily and making too much noise. Panic had destroyed his tactical awareness and turned him into easy target. When the silent ghost struck, it was over in seconds. The final enemy had taken cover behind the rocky outcrop, hoping to make a stand with his automatic weapon. He fired wild bursts into the darkness, hoping to hit something. But Marcus was not where the frightened man expected him to be. Years of combat had taught the veteran to attack from unexpected angles. Using a route that would have been impossible for most people, Marcus climbed the steep rocks and approached from above. The Cartel soldier was focused on the wrong direction when death came for him. One moment he was firing at shadows, and the next moment he was gone. Silence returned to the farm as the sun began to rise over the hills. 12 Cartel soldiers had come to take Marcus's land and kill him if he resisted. Now they were all dead, scattered across 200 acres of Texas countryside. The silent ghost had proven that superior training and tactics could overcome numerical advantage. Marcus checked each body to confirm the kills and gather intelligence. The weapons were military grade, and the equipment was expensive. These men had been well-funded and professionally trained, but they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating their target and fighting on his chosen ground. Radio chatter from their vehicles revealed that backup was on the way. More Cartel soldiers would arrive within hours, expecting to find their comrades in control of the farm. Instead, they would find a killing field and evidence that their advance team had been completely destroyed by a single defender. Marcus used the time to consolidate his position and prepare for the next wave of attacks. The bodies were moved to areas where they would be visible to anyone approaching the farm. Sometimes the best weapon was psychological, and letting your enemies see what happened to their friends could break their will to fight. The veteran also gathered the cartel weapons and ammunition, adding them to his own supplies. Professional soldiers always scavenged equipment from defeated enemies. The dead men no longer needed their guns, but Marcus could use every advantage in the battles to come. As morning light spread across the farm, Marcus felt the familiar calm that followed successful combat operations. His body was tired, but his mind was sharp and focused. The peaceful farmer had stepped aside, and the silent ghost was fully awake. This was what he had trained for during 20 years of military service. The cartel had made a serious miscalculation when they chose to target his property. They expected to find a helpless victim, not a special operations veteran who had spent years fighting enemies in their own territory. The tables had been turned, and now they were the ones who should be afraid. Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Criminal organizations like Cartels did not give up easily when challenged. They would send more men with better equipment and different tactics. But he was ready for whatever came next. The farm was his ground, and he would defend it with everything he had learned in 2 decades of warfare. Word of the failed assault spread quickly through the cartel network. Radio intercepts revealed angry conversations between field commanders and their bosses in Mexico. 12 trained soldiers had been sent to take one farm, and none of them had survived. The criminal organization was facing a problem they had never encountered before. Marcus monitored their communications while preparing for the inevitable counterattack. The cartel was bringing in reinforcements, but they were also changing their tactics. Instead of another direct assault, they planned to surround the farm and wait him out. They believed hunger and thirst would force him to surrender where bullets had failed. But the silent ghost had faced siege warfare before in desert compounds and mountain caves. His supply caches were well hidden and fully stocked. Solar panels and water purification systems gave him independence from outside resources. He could hold out for weeks while his enemies grew impatient and made mistakes. The new cartel team arrived 3 days later with twice as many men and heavier weapons. They established observation posts on the hills surrounding Marcus's property and settled in for a long wait. Their plan was simple: cut off all access to the farm and force the stubborn veteran to come to them. Marcus used his night vision equipment to study the enemy positions and count their numbers. 24 soldiers with military training and professional equipment. They had learned from the fate of the first assault team and were being much more careful. But patience was a weapon that cut both ways. On the 4th night, Marcus decided to take the initiative. Waiting for the enemy to make the first move was not always the best strategy. Sometimes you had to remind them that they were not safe even in their own positions. The hunter was about to become the hunted again. Moving like smoke through the darkness, Marcus approached the closest observation post. 2 cartel soldiers were taking turns on watch while their companions slept. They felt secure in their elevated position, with clear fields of view in all directions, but they had not considered the possibility of attack from directly below. The silent ghost climbed the rocky slope without disturbing a single stone. Years of mountain warfare had taught him to move through impossible terrain without making noise. The guards were focused on watching his farm and never looked down at the shadows beneath their feet. Marcus eliminated both sentries with his combat knife before they could raise an alarm. The bodies were hidden among the rocks where they would not be found until morning. 2 fewer enemies, and their radio was now in his possession. The psychological impact would be devastating when the others discovered what had happened. The second observation post fell the same way 2 hours later. Marcus approached from the blind spot in their surveillance and struck without warning. 4 cartel soldiers had been eliminated without firing a shot. Their expensive equipment was captured, and their communications network was compromised. By dawn, the remaining 20 soldiers knew they were no longer the hunters but the prey. Their confident siege had become a nightmare where death could strike from any direction. The veteran they were trying to starve out was picking them off one by one like a wolf hunting sheep. Panic began to spread through the cartel ranks as they realized their enemy was not trapped on the farm, but free to move anywhere he wanted. Radio chatter revealed growing fear and confusion among the survivors. Some wanted to retreat while others demanded immediate reinforcements. Marcus used their own radios to monitor their conversations and plan his next moves. Intelligence was as important as firepower in this type of warfare. Knowing what your enemies were thinking gave you the ability to anticipate and counter their plans before they could execute them. The cartel commanders in Mexico were growing angry at the continued failures of their soldiers. Millions of dollars in drugs were waiting to be moved through the smuggling route that Marcus's farm controlled. Every day of delay cost them money and reputation. Pressure was mounting for a final decisive assault. But the men on the ground were no longer eager to attack. They had seen what happened to their comrades who underestimated the silent ghost. Fear was spreading through their ranks like poison, weakening their will to fight. Some soldiers were already talking about abandoning the mission and returning to Mexico. Marcus knew he had achieved tactical superiority over a numerically superior force. His enemies were demoralized and divided while he remained focused and determined. The siege they had planned to break his spirit had instead broken theirs. Now it was time to finish what they had started and reclaim his peaceful farm once and for all. The final battle came at dawn on the seventh day when the remaining cartel soldiers made a desperate attempt to escape. Marcus watched through his rifle scope as 20 frightened men ran toward their vehicles, abandoning their equipment and their mission. Fear had finally broken their will to fight, and they wanted nothing more than to get away from the silent ghost. But Marcus could not let them leave alive to report back to their commanders. These men had come to kill him and take his land. They had terrorized his neighbors and threatened his community. In the world of special operations, there were times when showing mercy only invited future attacks. The fleeing soldiers were caught in the open with no cover between them and Marcus's prepared positions. His years of training took over as he methodically engaged each target. The cartel's expensive equipment and professional training meant nothing when faced with superior marksmanship and tactical positioning. Within 10 minutes it was over. 36 cartel soldiers had come to take one farm and none of them had survived. The silent ghost had defended his territory with the same deadly efficiency that had made him legendary in the military. His peaceful farm was quiet again, except for the sound of approaching sirens. Marcus had called the sheriff department after confirming that all threats were eliminated. He reported the incident as a home invasion and self-defense shooting, though he knew the truth was much more complicated. The scene that law enforcement found was unlike anything they had encountered in their rural county. Sheriff Martinez arrived with every available deputy plus state police backup. The veteran lawman had seen plenty of violence in his 30-year career, but nothing like the tactical battlefield that Marcus's farm had become. Bodies were scattered across 200 acres along with military-grade weapons and communications equipment. Federal agencies quickly became involved as the investigation expanded beyond local jurisdiction. DEA and FBI agents interviewed Marcus extensively, though much of his military background remained classified. What they could verify was that a decorated combat veteran had legally defended his property against armed criminals. The investigation revealed the true scope of the cartel operation in the region. Documents found in their vehicles showed plans to take over more than 20 local farms. The entire area was to become a smuggling corridor for drugs and human trafficking, worth millions of dollars per month. Marcus's successful defense had not only saved his own land, but had also disrupted a major criminal enterprise. The cartel's investment in men and equipment was completely lost. Their carefully planned expansion into Texas had been stopped by one man who refused to be intimidated. Local media coverage focused on the David versus Goliath aspect of the story. The lone farmer had defeated an army of criminals using skills learned in service to his country. Editorial writers praised Marcus as a hero, while law enforcement officials emphasized that citizens should not take the law into their own hands. The farming community's reaction was mixed between admiration and concern. Some neighbors viewed Marcus as a protector who had saved them all from a terrible fate. Others worried about living near someone capable of such lethal efficiency even when used in legitimate self-defense. Marcus understood both perspectives. His actions had been necessary to protect himself and his community, but they had also revealed a side of himself that he had hoped to leave behind. The peaceful farmer and the silent ghost were both parts of who he was, and sometimes circumstances required one to step aside for the other. Federal prosecutors decided not to file charges after reviewing all the evidence. The cartel soldiers had been armed and dangerous criminals who had initiated the violence. Marcus had acted within his rights as a property owner, defending his home against multiple attackers. The cartel leadership in Mexico quietly abandoned their plans for the region after learning what had happened to their soldiers. Word spread through criminal networks that some targets were better left alone. The cost of miscalculating could be catastrophic when dealing with certain types of people. Marcus spent weeks giving statements and answering questions from various investigators. His farm remained a crime scene until all the evidence was collected and analyzed. But eventually, the last police tape was removed, and he was free to return to his normal routine of farming and solitude. 6 months after the cartel raid, Marcus Williams stood on his porch watching the sunrise paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and orange. His farm looked peaceful again, with cattle grazing in the pasture and crops growing in neat rows. But everything had changed, even though the surface appeared the same as before. The story of what happened on his property had spread far beyond the local community. News reports and internet articles had turned the silent ghost into a legend among veterans and civilians alike. Some called him a hero, while others labeled him a dangerous vigilant. Marcus did not care about either description. What mattered was that his farm and his neighbors were safe. No other criminal organizations had attempted to target the area since word spread about the fate of 36 cartel soldiers. The demonstration of overwhelming force had created a zone of safety that law enforcement agencies had struggled to establish for years. Marcus had returned to his farming routine, but with modifications that reflected harsh lessons learned. Security systems remained active and weapons stayed within easy reach. The peaceful facade hid a warrior who was always ready to defend what was his. Vigilance was the price of the peace he had fought to preserve. Local law enforcement treated him with a mixture of respect and caution. Sheriff Martinez stopped by regularly to check on things and share intelligence about potential threats. The veteran lawman understood that sometimes citizens had to do what the system could not or would not do to protect themselves and their communities. Other farmers in the region had quietly upgraded their own security measures. Gun sales increased and self-defense classes became popular among people who had never considered such things before. The cartel attack had shattered the illusion that rural America was immune from organized crime and violence. Marcus received letters from veterans around the country who understood what he had done and why. Former soldiers knew that some enemies only responded to superior force, and that hesitation could be fatal when facing professional killers. The military brotherhood recognized one of their own who had answered the call when duty demanded it. Federal agencies continued to monitor the area for signs of renewed cartel activity. Intelligence reports suggested that criminal organizations had written off the region as too dangerous and too well defended. The cost of attempting operations there outweighed any potential profits from drug smuggling routes. Elena Rodriguez visited Marcus every few weeks to share local news and gossip. The elderly woman who had warned him about the cartel threat now considered herself partly responsible for his survival. She brought homemade food and updates about neighborhood families who were grateful for his protection. Marcus had found his peace again, but on different terms than before the attack. He was still the quiet farmer who worked his land from sunrise to sunset. But now everyone knew that beneath the peaceful exterior was a man who could become the silent ghost whenever circumstances required it. The farm that had been his sanctuary had also become his victory. Every morning when he walked among his cattle and checked his crops, Marcus remembered the price of freedom and security. Those who sought to take what belonged to others learned that some people would fight back with skills and determination that could not be overcome by numbers alone. Children from neighboring farms sometimes rode their bicycles past his property hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous veteran. Marcus would wave from his porch, and they would race home to tell their parents they had seen the man who defeated the cartel. He had become a folk hero, whether he wanted that role or not. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus finished his morning chores and prepared for another day of honest work. His cattle were healthy, and his crops were growing well. The land that had been watered with the blood of his enemies now produced food and life. Violence had given way to growth and renewal. Sometimes visitors would ask Marcus if he regretted what had happened or wished things could have been different. He would look out over his peaceful farm and shake his head. A man's home was his castle, and every castle needed a guardian willing to defend it. The silent ghost slept peacefully, knowing his watch had not ended but simply changed form.